When given the chance to advance one's career by going to India, Bermuda, or Calgary, you may be surprised to hear someone choose the sunny Alberta city, given the options. But after 4 kids, 9 grandchildren, and a successful merger to create a North American business powerhouse, there's nowhere Alan Norris would rather be. Hey there. Welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. In this series, host Adam Legg talks to Alberta's top CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about their journey to the C-suite, what keeps them up at night as an Albertan and as a leader in their industry, and what their outlook is for the future. On today's episode, we speak with Alan Norris, the Executive Chair of Brookfield Properties, about his journey to the C-suite, his experience taking an ailing company from the edge of bankruptcy into a successful, powerful merger. And he talks about the role of an executive chair. We also discuss housing affordability in Canada and North America, the importance of being present within the community, and the value of passion in one's career. And if you found this episode interesting or insightful, let us know by heading to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a quick review and rating. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged. And today I'm excited to speak with Alan Norris, who is the Executive Chair of Brookfield Properties and Brookfield Residential. I've known Alan for many years and am amazed at his humble view of his role and impact, both corporately and in the community. He's given so much to our community through his volunteer roles, particularly with the Resolve campaign. He oversaw the merger of Karma and Brookfield to create a North American powerhouse developer and home builder. I always come away from my discussions with Alan feeling better, more positive, and having been in the presence of a true leader, someone who makes you feel stronger and more capable. I also had the privilege of awarding Alan with the Distinguished Business Leader Award during my time at the Calgary Chamber, and it's a privilege to speak with him today. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks very much indeed for that kind introduction. Thank you.
You've earned it in a distinguished career, my friend. Absolutely. Alan, before we dig in, tell us a little bit more about Brookfield Properties and residential in terms of size, its locations, where are its markets?
Just to give some scope, the residential business we're now in about 24 markets in North America, 3 in Canada, 21 in the US, probably around about 6 billion in assets. We sell probably between 8,000 and 10,000 service lots a year to builders in both countries, obviously, and we build about 3,500 homes a year. Again, in some of those, not in all locations, but the land is in all locations, but the housing is only in a certain number of the locations. So, as I say, and we're probably 2.5 billion in revenue a year on the residential business. The properties business is really just I just oversee the development aspect for properties, and that's really just pulling together any re-entitlements for existing assets that are within the group, whether it be replanning a retail mall or another site that requires different skill sets to be brought together. So it's really just the development side of Brookfield Properties that I oversee that aspect as well.
It's amazing to see the scale and scope of the company, particularly its emergence in the U.S. as a key player down there. It really has taken over North America as one of the best and top companies in the space. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Alan, people love to hear the journey, the story of a CEO's rise to their role. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the journey, Alan finishing high school. And we know it wasn't here in Canada.
That's right.
You're lovely Lilt. Give us a sense. What was Alan at the cusp of graduation? His high school diploma in hand, looking out to the great world. What was next, and how did it go from there?
Yeah, it was not here. It was in Scotland, as I'm sure most have gathered that now. But went to university in Glasgow at University of Strathclyde, got my undergraduate degree there in accountancy and economics. And then I applied to various CA firms, and there was only so many of them. Well, there's probably less now, actually, when I think about it with all the mergers. But I sent off 12 resumes, got 12 interviews, got 4 second interviews, and 1 job offer. So it was it was a little bit alarming at the time, but got the job, and it was with Deloitte's. So I articled and got my CA in Scotland with Deloitte's. And towards the end of the articling period, and when I was getting my CA, I'd been doing some work in London. And I went into the London office and chatted with the international partner. Back then, basically said, I want to try something different for a couple of years. back in those days in Scotland, it was a little bit, there was a bit of who you knew to get a job sometimes, or what age you were from a tenure point of view, to move in, as opposed to ability. And I mean, I had no idea if I had ability or not, but I knew I didn't know anybody, and I was too young. So I met with him in London, and he had this big map on the wall, and said, "Where would you like to go?" And he circled a bunch of offices where I could potentially go, and I'd never been to Calgary. I didn't really want to go to a big city, big office, and be lost in the shuffle, because I'd already been in the London office a few times. And I picked Calgary, and that was 1980, and came across here supposedly for 2 years. And then I was meant to go back to the UK and do some work in different things there. Stayed a third year with Deloitte's, and I had been doing the audit of New West. Some of our older members of BCAA will remember them. Very large, diversified real estate company. And I was doing the audit there, and the CFO went to Karma, and 3 months later, he called me up just towards the end of my third year in Calgary and said, "I need some help." And it was Murray Fox. And so I met with him, and I went over there as controller to work for Murray, just when Karma was on the brink of default on many of its debts in 1983. So I sort of knew what I was getting into, that I was there to help restructure and help Murray restructure the company. And so I went through that process. We filed CCAA. We did a sort of dry run of a restructuring, which was really just sort of a test run, and then we had to do the proper CCAA, because the debt levels back then, the interest rates were in the high 20s, the low 20s, I mean, high teens.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And so we went through the restructuring and implemented it, did it in 85 and implemented 86. And we went from 300 plus people and $1 billion in assets down, unfortunately, to about 16 people and 100 million in assets during that period, and then had to sort of rebuild the business back up again. And so unfortunately or whatever, the banks, the major banks in Canada were the biggest shareholders in the company, because we issued shares for some of the debt that was owed. So we had an active program to go out and seek real equity to replace the banks, because they were not equity holders per se that they wanted to be. So we fortunately partnered up with what is now the Brookfield Group, and they bought in 1987, and they bought half the company for 20 million. Oh, gosh, so wow. I'll tell you, as time progressed, we've been public and private with them over the years. Yes. And when we finally went the last time private, we went private at $3 billion. So the group's done well by us.
Remarkably well under your leadership, Alan. Yeah, absolutely. When did you become CEO? What year?
94. I became CFO in 1985, because I was the only CA left almost. So I think that was maybe the reason. And then became CEO, and actually that's not true, because I took over from Murray in 94. He's actually a CA as well. But yeah, I took over in 94.
That's an amazing story. Amazing story. It must have been challenging to have gone through the CCAA process and restructure. Yeah,
it was amazing. But you know what? It's a testament to the fact that you can do that and then reemerge. It does talk about the benefits of having that available to companies. Yeah. I mean, Murray and I were professional managers. I mean, whether somebody created a problem or you come in and clean it up, that's somewhat irrelevant. But we come in as professional managers just to try and turn it around and use that to rebuild the business again. And it's a success story. So it's an interesting side by it is I was standing in the Phoenix airport a number of years ago, and Al Walkovich, who's Chief Justice for Alberta, Al was on the bench back when we were filing CCAA. Oh, okay. And I saw him, and I didn't recognize. I saw his back tag, and it said Al Walkovich. And so I just tapped him on the shoulder and explained what happened to Karma and where we are, 20, 30 years later. He was just thrilled.
Yeah.
Because he governed the CCAA.
Yeah, that's amazing. Maybe just a quick backtrack, Alan. I'm curious. You picked Calgary in 1980, so we hadn't yet had the Olympics. Was it literally a blind throw of the dart on the map to Calgary, or did you have any sense of what it was like?
I knew things were going well in 1980. Okay. That was soon to change, but exactly. I didn't want to go somewhere. I was offered some of the tax havens, Bermuda or the Middle East, and Australia seemed too far. if I went to the US, I had to commit to go back to the UK to teach US GAAP, as well as, run a bunch of the US subsidiaries somewhere in the UK. So as I said, I came here, and after I got the job, and then I met Shelley here, my wife, and it was sort of 4 kids and 9 grandkids later. This is most definitely home. So
that's wonderful. Wonderful. Well, you're probably one of the only people where Calgary beat out Bermuda for a job.
There was some regrets that first winter when I was up in the Alaska Highway doing an audit of a drilling company up there. So it was interesting to say the least.
Yeah, counting drill bits. I'm sure that would have been fun. Yeah. Alan, what does a day in the life of you as executive chair look like? Do you have any key routines or practices, things that you keep consistent through your day?
Right now, it's obviously a lot more leisurely than when I was CEO about 17 months ago or whatever. I chair 3 of the companies: the development company, the residential company, and I actually chair the global construction company called Multiplex. So they're in 5 continents. So I chair that as well. So I don't have any day-to-day responsibilities for anything. I'm really just chairing and providing mentorship to the young talent, the senior team, anything they want some help on. And so I love doing that. But I would say that I'm in the office literally right now as we're speaking, Adam, but that's because I can't golf because of back surgery last year. So, when it's a nice day like this, trust me, you're not going to find me in the office, and I'll narrow up the times I do come into the office, but I love coming in still and seeing people, seeing everybody, having a coffee, keeping in touch with what's happening in the business, but really trying to make sure I don't get in the way on the day-to-day, try and provide advice if asked for.
Yeah. Well, I know just given your tenure and your career, your leadership, that many people seek your advice. And so what advice would you have for someone starting their career today if they looked at you and said, I'd like to be a CEO like Alan, chair one day? What advice would you give them?
I sort of fell into real estate a little bit myself, but but in reflection, I think it's having a passion. If there's something you're passionate about, or an industry or whatever, try and expose yourself, whether it be going through university or you volunteer for some things. And if you find an industry or a particular thing you're passionate about, see if you can find some companies in that sphere, and then try and seek out some of what I call the best cultured companies in that space.
Yeah.
And whether it be internships or whatever, try and get a foot in the door in some of those to see what you can do. But so many of the skills coming out of university now, in many cases, really just are a precursor to go in. We hire for passion and try and teach the business, albeit there are some, even at University of Calgary, we've all put some money into the real, as you well know, Adam, the real estate side of things up at U of C.
Yep.
So, but that doesn't teach everything about this business, but it's a good entry point. But if you're passionate about something, I've really never felt I've worked. It's something, I loved every single day because I loved the people I was working with and the business I was in. And the to-do list never goes away. I still do a to-do list, by the way, every morning.
Good.
Just to, some of it's personal, but some of it is just who I'm meeting and other things. And there's also still want to stay involved with the community, albeit until I finish off replacing body parts in sequence, it seems, with my surgeries. I'm not going to volunteer for anything just until I get myself and get it all organized.
In tip-top shape, yeah. I totally understand. Well, I know what you mean about the passion. Think of Lois Mitchell, who often says, if you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life, kind of
exactly
view of the world. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are there any things, Alan, that you think are essential for people to have, skills, capabilities, outlooks in today's workforce that you think are essential, or some are overrated?
Yeah, I think, I look in some of the US, we've got a proliferation of universities now. Some of the student loan things, not to go off topic, but the student loan issue is an issue down there because in many cases the concept was obviously you got the loan and then you got a degree, which gave you much more leverage from a job point of view entering the job market. And it's been diluted somewhat. So people, kids have to differentiate themselves in some other way, as opposed to just a degree. And I think a passion and willing to try different things and put your hand up is the way to continue to advance with respect to things. Opportunities present themselves in every company that you get into. It's trying to get that entry into the door. I mean, things have changed now. I mean, in some respects, I mean, we'll see where it is on the labor market for getting access to jobs. I mean, obviously during the pandemic, there was some groups could not hire enough people to get in the door, and they were offering retention bonuses and things. But the key thing is to try and get into something that you somewhat passionate about, and then just use that and then broaden. I mean, our leadership team here is a combination of, whether it be engineers, financial planners, different skill sets. But once you move on up through the organization, your technical skill that brought you here is less relevant.
Yeah, very true, very true. Alan, is there anything that people would be surprised to learn about you? Do you have some sort of hobby or skill, ride a unicycle, anything like that?
I was thinking about that. I mean, the one thing I made the right career choice at the end of the day, but I mean, there was a number of us I was a pretty good golfer when I was younger. And there was 6 of us that played a lot of tournaments, amateur tournaments back when I was at university, deciding whether to turn pro or not. And 3 of the 6 of us turned pro, not me. I stayed at university, did all that. And one of them ended up not making it, became a pro at a golf club, and another one sold clubs. And the other one made the European Tour and really just retired from the European Tour a few years ago. So it was on the thing, but without question, I made the right career choice to stay at university and then move to Canada and all the rest of it. So, but I was a decent golfer back in those days. And I actually got back to scratch when I was 40. So it was it was 18 and 40. So, but those days are past now, I think.
Well, still, it's all about the passion, as you say, right?
That's right.
Passion.
That's right.
Switching gears, Alan, to opportunities and challenges in the business side. What are some of the things that are in front of the company right now that you're looking at? It could be new markets, products, innovations, technologies. What's exciting you about what you see as the future for Brookfield?
I mean, we're actively, because of the number of markets we're in now in the US, we're actively working with many of the national builders. I mean, whether it be the large ones that are doing 60,000 homes a year, 50,000 homes a year, things like that, and working. They just don't have the manpower it takes for them to produce their own lots and build on them is huge. So we're looking at different ways to be a provider of lots. Land is still in short supply, believe it or not, all through the US, just because of the entitlement process and how long it takes. And we've got a great deal of trust with many of those builders. Many of them, as public builders, are trying to please Wall Street by not owning the land and entitling it themselves. They'd rather go land light, as you would call it, such that somebody else services the land, owns the land, services it, and then sells to them. And they're more of a machine for turning over the homes. And as long as you structure some of the deals properly with the appropriate venture partners, their skin in the game, things like that, it's something we think we can be very good at, because that's where although we both 3,500 homes ourselves in both Canada and US, we think we're very good at the land business. That's our sort of that's our grassroots, shall we say? And we just do that in 15 states.
Yeah, wow. I'm just trying to process the number you said a minute ago of 50 to 60,000 homes a year.
Yeah, for some of those builders.
Those builders, wow, that is unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
And it's only getting a little bit bigger, Adam, just because with the tightening or with rates moving, access to liquidity, some of the smaller builders are not going to have the same access, because many of them deal with community and regional banks in the US. And with the failures recently, that's going to cause tightening on the lending standards, whereas many of the large publics raising bonds on Wall Street, as we have as well. I mean, we've done the same thing.
So a bit of a leaning out of the smaller players. And
it will. I mean, the market share for the big builders has gone up over the last little bit. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's the reality. And also the market share for new home sales in the US has gone up because many existing homeowners don't have a motivation to move when they're locked in at a 2.5% mortgage, and the mortgage doesn't go with them. So they're sort of stuck in place in some respects, as opposed to going out buying something and paying 6 to 6.5.
Yeah,
it's a big issue on the supply side.
Yeah. I'm curious, Alan, in terms of the markets you're in, to sort of a two-part question. One, what are some of the hotter markets in terms of demand and interest? And two, is Brookfield experiencing some of that trend of pandemic and post-pandemic, people moving into some of the smaller communities outside of the larger centers, going into the Montanas and the Utahs, et cetera, the
Yeah,
Idahos.
I would say we're not in. I mean, the two markets that spring to life, for instance, the three markets would be Boise, Salt Lake City, and Phoenix, as an example. Albeit they're not small. Phoenix is not a smaller market, but we had a ton of people from California moving into many of those markets. I would say Boise and Salt Lake City have slowed down considerably. Phoenix has slowed down as well, but it's a much bigger metropolis to begin with.
Yeah.
So it can self-generate and get some activity back again on its own. Some of the other stronger markets are East Coast that didn't really drop down that much recently with the rates moving up. I'm talking the Carolinas, Florida, places like that. It did not suffer as much. California is suffering a bit, I would say, but I mean it's a much higher price point. It's a challenge. I mean, California is losing population, and they don't make it very easy. I mean, Governor Newsom is trying to increase housing supply, but it seems to be one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake with respect to some of the regulations which don't allow the housing supply to be increased, and therefore, the price points are ridiculous when you look at a similar house in California versus a comparable house in Texas or whatever. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. That's always been something I know maybe people have said, I could buy a mansion in Texas for half the price of my home here in Calgary. What's the differential there, Alan? Is it just land supply and availability?
It is. I mean, I was chairing a conference in San Francisco, and I was quoting, this was 5 years ago. So the numbers are different now, and I'll tell you which way. But there was a similar house in the East Bay that we were building there, and similar one in Austin, Texas. Same 1,500 square feet. The one in the East Bay was $835,000. The one in Austin, Texas was $245,000. Some of it is land because of constraint on land. Some of it is red tape as to how long it takes to get approvals. Because I mean, a 2x4 is a 2x4.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Toilet's a toilet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is there, does that apply also to some of the Canadian versus the US market differentials? Yeah.
I mean, you look at the pricing in Toronto and Vancouver. I mean, Vancouver is virtually out of land. It's always been going vertical for quite some time.
Yeah.
Obviously, Toronto needs to do, I'm not saying that has to do more downtown, but I think it has to do more as you reach out, and definitely more density. And as they keep referring to the missing middle, I think we have to continue to do that with respect to the product, the built form.
Yeah, completely agree. Alan, one thing I always hear is that the sector in and of itself has really not been all that innovative. A wood frame house is a wood frame house and has been for many decades. Are there any markets or any technologies or innovations you're seeing around the world that are interesting, that are sort of worth following or considering?
No, I mean, you've probably heard me in some of my things in the past, Adam. I mean, I say the latest innovation was the nail gun, which I'm somewhat critical of our own industry. We have to change. I mean, we have labor issues without question. I mean, we were not an industry of choice for many kids coming out of school. So we're trying to work on that. But at the same time, on increasing the labor supply, we have to get more innovative with respect to how we build housing. I mean, we get there a little bit with some offsite work, with some things. There's a number of groups have looked at factory build, so we're not building out on the actual job site. There are challenges, candidly, not just on doing that. You need a certain volume to be able to do it, but there's also challenges in literally transporting some of the homes in that form, based on we're getting a little bit narrower in many spots. So even just literally, you need to be transporting the house to the job site before the community is actually completely finished, like sidewalks or, lamp standards and light standards and things like that. So, but I'm getting into a little bit of minutia, but the other side of things, I mean, there's some 3D communities going up in the US. We have to sort of take a look at some of those things. We have to look at many of the big suppliers are using AI in a big way to try and deal with pricing with respect to it. So I can't say there's any particular country that is ahead. I would say that, I mean, Australia is similar to us in many respects, but I don't think they're ahead. I mean, they've got a population, a larger country, a large country, but only 24 million population, whereas we're very large as well with only, 36 million?
Yeah, about 38.
So we need to get more innovative as an industry, without question, in my opinion, to try and deal with things. I mean, the labor side is been forcing us for some time. I mean, I've done a lot of work on the labor side to try and raise awareness of the opportunities in this industry. We created the Karma Center for Excellence back in 1998. We helped contribute to the new SAIT trades building. And I'm a board member of the Leading Builders of America, which I was on. We set up a not-for-profit called the Building Talent Foundation to try and raise awareness and attract people to our industry. So I've been on that board for the last 2 or 3 years and still stay on it, even though I'm not CEO anymore, but just because I have a passion for trying to attract people to the industry. But to me, we still need those people to come in, but then we need to train them for today's environment, but also then retrain them for where we think the technology will take us. But we have to be more innovative as an industry, in my opinion, as to what the solutions are.
Yeah, I keep getting little feeds in my different streams on 3D printed houses and those sorts of things, and it seems interesting, but it doesn't seem to be proven at scale yet. So
correct. Nowhere close.
Yeah.
Nowhere close.
Yeah, exactly. You touched a bit on some of the initiatives around the labor side. I think that's critical. Would you say that is the number one challenge facing the industry right now, is the labor? Yeah,
I would say so. I mean, if I look at Canada and the US separately, Canada, yes, has a labor issue, and it's also got a lack of housing issue. I mean, immigration is going to be 500,000 a year coming into Canada. Forgetting about this year, it could be close to 1 million due to some of the issues out in Ukraine and other areas. But even if you just take a normalized 500,000 immigration, that's the equivalent of about 240,000 homes a year. 2.2 whatever persons.
Household formation.
That's the most we would ever build. I mean, normally we're in that 210 to 220 across Canada. So that's ignoring births over deaths with respect to natural growth. So we are continuing to exacerbate the problem. And in some of the markets, we have a disconnect between income and house prices. I'm picking Toronto and Vancouver as examples. So that's one aspect on Canada. From a US point of view, I would say that they're definitely not encouraging immigration at this point, and the labor force is dwindling from a construction point of view. So we run into a situation where there's a constrained supply, because immigration should help us if we bring in the right people into Canada. And the federal government is addressing that. And I mean, we've addressed that through BCA, through some of our recommendations and things like that. But we need to be bringing in skilled workers as much as we can. I mean, there's still going to be the refugee status. I get that. But we do have to try and make sure that we're bringing in skilled workers that can add to the economy as much as they can, and recognize those skills. That's one of the big things.
Yeah. I've heard you and many other your peers in the sector talk about the bit of the chicken and egg situation with the notion of trying to bring in more people through immigration, but without the housing to be able to accommodate them. Where does the labor come from to build housing that's going to support people that come here? So you're right.
And we still, I mean, one of the other things that we talked about on affordability just briefly is that it takes longer to get things approved. It's just unbelievably tough. And I realize that we have to have a playing field that everybody knows where you're playing, but it's one of those things that California is very tough, but we're probably just as bad up here now. And in other jurisdictions are a lot easier to do it, and you still build good communities.
I was going to ask about how that is viewed from the sector standpoint, because I can recall from not only a very brief stint working in the planning department of the city of Calgary, that when they were undergoing a review to increase the speed at which they would permit land and development and housing, all the way through my economic development career, it's always been a challenge. Has it gotten any better, any worse, about the same over the decades you've been in leadership here in the sector?
Well, I'll pick a Calgary example for our audience. Mackenzie Town, we started planning that in late 1990 and opened it up in 1995. And that was a brand new concept from an urban planning perspective. So 4.5 years or whatever, bought some land in the northwest. It's now called Rockland Park. Took us 12 years to get that approved in the city of Calgary, and we opened it up a few years ago. And we bought some land from the Arizona State Land Board about 1.5 years before I retired as CEO. And we had it approved before I retired as CEO. It was approved within 15 months in Phoenix.
We wonder why we can't get things done in Canada.
And the quality of the community is going to be the same. They're good. It's not as if it's cookie cutter. It's got good innovation. It's got good things, and there's a lot of stuff that we're doing that is not value add.
Yeah.
And in that time, the market was doing this, and supply was definitely required. And the government, the local government, responded in kind to try and get things expedited and all of this stuff.
Yeah, and it's just a greater culture and mindset in the States of enabling the economic development, enabling the housing development, as opposed to the stopping things from happening here in Canada.
No, that's right. That's right.
As an interesting aside, I can remember when you were doing Mackenzie Town, is around the same time I was in planning school, and you hired, at the time, one of the most notable designers in the world,
Andres Duaney,
and his new urbanist concepts
That's right.
to do that. I can still remember your first phase, the
square,
the gazebo, and the units over the garage and the back lanes. Those were exceptional, and just really
that was my
visionary.
sole contribution, was that naming the villages Inverness, Elgin, and Prestwick.
good Scottish names.
That's
back
right.
Home. Yeah,
exactly.
That's wonderful. But I think that project put you on the map from a new urbanist perspective. Yes. in the work you did by hiring Duaney. Yeah, that was wonderful. In terms of sustainability, Alan, what broad topic, lots that fits in there, but what does it look like for Brookfield in terms of the work that you do, and how are you focusing on sustainability as a company?
I think some aspects of the built form. Obviously we have to continue to evolve. We did as an example, we did a net zero house up in the north, just to so that we could actually comment properly, having done it, as opposed to, this can't work or this shouldn't work. So we actually did it. And I know Jay's doing some as well, Jay Westman. Mm-hmm. And so I think the built form, and trying to bring some more of that, through the efficiency of the house, etc., dealing with the waste on the actual job sites and things of that nature, looking at more wood. Building code allows you to go 6, 8+ stories now from a wood structure perspective. Mm-hmm. So looking at some of those innovations. Again, we need to make sure that, I'm not saying incented, but in some cases there was pushback, because in some cases with the 6-story instead of the 4-story hookups, the additional parking cost for the additional units just negated the additional density you were getting. So there was no incentive to take the risk on marketing those extra units. So we have to use a little bit of common sense with respect to how much parking. Parking costs a lot if you have to go underground on the built form, and we're going to have to, but it's ridiculously expensive.
Yeah. What is it now? I remember numbers around 50,000 a stall.
Yeah, it's north of that now. I'm 18 months out of touch probably. So.
Yeah. Are you seeing demand or interest in more of these net zero type homes, energy efficiency, or the costs for the end purchaser outweighing what they want to lay out at the very beginning?
The costs are still going to be higher without question, because until we get close to the time, we don't have the supply chain that is dealing with it on a regular basis. So you're dealing more on a bit of a one-off with respect to some of the product. So you don't get the efficiency. No different than when we put in sprinklers, in one of the communities here. It's much more expensive than what it cost us down in California to put them into our homes down there, because it was expected and there was a supply chain that matched. So again, I think we just have to make sure we understand exactly what it is, so we can get the supply chain in place to deal with volume, as opposed to one-off. It's the same as any other business.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Let's switch gears. You mentioned affordability and affordable housing a minute ago. That's a perfect segue. You've done so much in the community, Alan, for affordable housing. You chair the Resolve campaign, raised $120 million for affordable housing in Calgary. You're past chair of the Homeless Foundation. Tell me about your interests and experiences to those incredibly important efforts, and what drew you to them, and to lend your name to them.
Yeah, I've always sort of volunteered in some capacity, and I was on a couple of other boards, and then not-for-profits. And Jim Gray called me up, and Jim was one of the initiators on. He saw the 60 Minutes show and about Calgary on homelessness, and somebody's living on the street, and he called me up a little bit later and said they're going to be setting up this committee to come up with a 10-year plan for homelessness. You should show up. I'd like you to go there, because Jim's affiliated with Brookfield on the oil and gas side, and up on the advisory board, and
That's
was
right,
on the
yes.
board of Brookfield up at the top level. And he's been a sort of mentor for me for many, many years, and a sounding board. And so I go to the meeting and show up, and then find out, of course, typical Jim, I was already on the committee by the time I got there.
Voluntold, I think that's
That's
called.
right. So anyway, I went on this committee. There was about 24, 25 of us, and it was 8 from a business community leader point of view, 8 representing the not-for-profit sector, and 8 representing the city or province or feds. So we spent a year, came up with a 10-year plan, and then the decision was made to ask the Calgary Homeless Foundation to steward the plan. And so some of us from that group went onto the board of the Calgary Homeless Foundation. So I was one of them. And then a year later, I was asked to chair it. And so I did that. I mean, and actually steward the plan.
Yes.
And then part of the plan, we realized we needed more affordable housing in the city. And that was part of the plan. And so 3 of the agencies had, including Calgary Homeless Foundation, had put together a plan which was subsequently called Resolve. And they asked me to chair that. And I realized I was conflicted because CHF was one of the 9 agencies. Right. So I asked somebody else to take over CHF. I went over to Resolve and ended up chairing that, creating the campaign committee, cabinet, and tried to come up with $120 million of new money, philanthropic money. We went through that downturn, Adam. We ended up raising $75 million from philanthropy, but we topped it up with many other stuff coming on, some CMHC grants and other things. But the aspect of the campaign was so good that it was the city coming together, supported by provincial government grants, which were there already, created by our previous Premier Stelmach. And then some of those not-for-profits either having existing land or other assets that they brought to the table. So it was very good in coming. And we actually had all 3 levels of government supporting it, which was always a keynote of any speech I made when we were opening a building, that to have 3 levels of government agreeing on something was always a novel concept. So but the good news was that we got 2,200 people housed over the course of the campaign, and 21 buildings built at least.
Yeah, that was phenomenal, and many different approaches to it, and housing formats and styles.
All scattered through the city. 9 agencies, and many different clients. I mean, some were from housed seniors, alcohol, mental health, accessibility. So a number of different groups that were represented and assisted. So it was a good. I mean, we wrote a small book about it afterwards, just so we could try and share it with the rest of Canada if they wanted to do something. Because to me, it's something that Toronto's been talking about forever. I was getting calls from people in Toronto. Well, how did you manage to do it? And I said, it's really about this city, quite honestly. I mean, if you put people together and they have a task and they want to do something, it's a can-do, will-do city. And Calgary stepped up again.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to you on your leadership for that, Alan. That made such a difference to, as you say, 2,200 households in the city.
Yeah.
Other than more money, as you look at your experiences through the Homeless Foundation and the 10-year plan to end homelessness, what do we need to do today to increase the supply of what I'll call non-market housing? So people often call affordable housing, but the housing that is non-market for people who can't afford traditional market costs. Are there innovations in zoning, land use designations, et cetera, or is it more just an issue of dollars?
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, the Resolve campaign was looking at those that were either coming off the street or whatever. I mean, then you've got a next level of market housing, which people can't afford to live in where they're working. And so you have some issues there. And then you've got just normal market where it's there. I mean, Calgary for the longest, has been okay on the latter 2 fronts, generally because we're not such a big city. So you can commute 20 minutes, for instance, and to where you're working and things like that in many cases. At the bottom end of the spectrum, quite honestly, I think the National Housing Strategy, I mean, the government set up an $11 billion fund. And with our Resolve campaign, quite honestly, I went to Ottawa, talked to the minister, and said, I don't mind sharing our views with respect to the housing continuum as to what the different triggers are as you go from a shelter to a free market home, and the sort of the 20 stops in between as to the types of housing you will find in that continuum, and offered to share my experience from both sides, because I'd seen both sides, obviously the Homeless Foundation, the Resolve campaign, and then running one of the largest development and housing companies in Canada and North America. I didn't get a return call after that. I don't know why, but
Is that right? Oh,
offered to help. Just for no. I mean, I was working full time. I didn't need to do this,
yes,
but I just
exactly.
wanted to make sure they got it right. If they're going to spend 11 billion, let's not screw it away. So, but some of the money's been leaked out, but so much of it is not being used properly or not being used. So there's money set aside. I don't know if it's still there, but there's ways to do things across the country with the assistance of the private sector and the public sector working together to do some of these things. I mean, even if it's the bottom 50% of the equity, if you want to call it that, and then somebody does the top 50%, and it's no different. The infrastructure program we're talking about suggested if you've got 10 billion, you go in as a junior equity and let the private sector go in as the senior equity for the other 10 billion on the top. And then you get $20 billion worth of infrastructure, but you get somebody other than government running the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the same can be said, I would say, for agencies and for-profit groups. I mean, you wouldn't want the for-profit group necessarily running the affordable product, because we've got some tremendous agencies in this city, for instance, that know how to do those things. They just need the capital to be able to get the buildings built.
Yeah, that's shocking and sad that an offer. It's no wonder that money's still sitting there. If great advice from people like you is going unanswered from the elected officials in Ottawa. That's very unfortunate. Very unfortunate to hear. Well, I think it's about the community coming together. I know there's lots of initiatives that hopefully, given that this seems to have resurfaced as an issue, the affordability of housing, both market and non-market, and tapping into some of the government pools can be some solutions for both the private sector and not-for-profit sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is some of the government involvement is necessary for some of that stuff, but we just need to make sure at what level and who's actually going to be running and coming up with. I mean, if they're there for financing and all the rest of it, that's some aspect for some things. We just have to make sure it's in the right hands for running them.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, as we wrap here, a question about Alberta. You picked it from a map, knowing very little about it. Here you are, you build a family, a career, and as you look to the long term for Alberta, are you excited? Are you concerned? Where do you think we're heading, and what do we need to do to make sure we're on the right path?
I'm feeling more optimistic in the last couple of years than I was for a few years prior to that. I think we're starting to see some movement into Alberta. I want it to be more than just it's cheaper to live in Calgary and Edmonton than it is in Toronto or Vancouver. I want it more than that. Yeah. We need to sort of make sure we season our industries and truly be that center for excellence from an energy perspective. And I'm talking in the broadest sense for energy. And I think we could be that center for excellence in all aspects as we go through and evolve. I think our quality of life is second to none with respect to what we have here. We have to maintain that. And we have to I'm not saying we have to return to the Alberta advantage, but we have to make sure that it's not just housing affordability that makes us different than others. I mean, that competitive and entrepreneurial spirit, I want to make sure we don't lose that. And we have that entrepreneurial spirit to try and create the businesses again, which I think we have. It's just making sure that we bring the best and the brightest, or we keep the best and the brightest here and not lose them.
Right.
Because that is what's going to create the opportunities down the road. And I look at the companies that have grown. I mean, we earlier on in the podcast, I mean, we went from 60 people to 1,500 across North America. But within Alberta, that's 16 people that were all in Calgary and Edmonton. We're still about 350 or whatever. So, I mean, we created something from nothing much here. And we just want to have people want to live here and create opportunities and create that business environment that allows them to be able to do it.
Well, that's a great way to end our conversation, Alan, on a spirit and note of optimism and belief in this place. And so thank you for sharing your story and what's going on at Brookfield with us. And again, congratulations on your leadership, and thank you for being part of BCA and today.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta, and you can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. And we'd love to connect with you on social media. So give us a follow at Biz Council AB on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. And if you liked this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.